Have you ever thought of yourself as an evangelist? You know, an evangelist. Someone like Philip in today's scripture reading. Someone who shares the gospel with people who don't know Jesus. Have you thought of yourself as someone who tells others about Jesus? My guess is that many of you are shaking your head no. Not a lot of us get excited about the word evangelism. It makes some of us feel guilty or down on ourselves because we're not doing it. When our sons were quite a bit younger, I remember one night where I offered to put Daniel to bed. And I said, hey, is it okay if I put you to bed instead of mommy? And Daniel turned to me and said, no, you're chopped liver, Dad. Very nice thing for him to say. For some of us, the word evangelism makes us feel like chopped liver. Now, for others, there's no way that we would ever want to do evangelism. A large study was done on evangelism in mainline churches like ours. One finding was that a vast majority of people would rather get a root canal than talk about, much less do, evangelism. For the last 40 years, most churches have been in decline. It seems we've developed a life-threatening aversion to evangelism. Why? Why do many of us have a negative reaction to evangelism? Well, there are several reasons, and here are some of the most common that I've experienced or that I've heard. I don't want to be anything close to the stereotypes that I associate with an evangelist. You know, I don't want to have fake eyelashes or big hair or swindle people out of their money. Anyone ever thought that? Okay. I don't want to offend people by pressuring them with threats about where they'll spend eternity. Anyone ever thought that? Yeah. Besides that, I wonder sometimes what business I have telling people what they ought to be doing or believing. I have enough trouble in my life doing and believing what I should. Anyone ever thought that? Yeah. Here's another one. I'd rather just do the best I can, be the best Christian I can be, and hope that that's a good enough witness to others. After all, St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary. I like to think that my actions speak loud enough so that I can avoid the using words if necessary part. Anyone ever thought that? Yeah. See, but what happens when we meet someone who needs to hear some words about God's love? Someone like the Ethiopian eunuch. He is an African man with a very important job that came at a very high price. At some point in his life, he had been castrated so that he could serve the queen of Ethiopia. That's why he's called a eunuch. What's life like for him? Well, in terms of money and career, this guy is very successful. Only the wealthiest had chariots in these days, and there he is riding in one. But he's unable to be married or have children, and in a time and culture where passing on the family line is all important, he has no descendants. In addition to that, religious laws keep him from participating in worship services. Deuteronomy 23:1 specifically prohibits castrated people from entering the worship assembly. So he's a religious outsider. Yet somehow he has heard of God and wants to know more about God. So what do you do when you don't think of yourself as an evangelist, but you come across someone like this man? Someone who bears deep wounds inflicted by the world. Someone who's not welcomed by traditional religion. Someone who looks successful but feels empty. Someone who's searching for God. Someone searching for something besides what he has. Someone who needs to hear about God's love. someone like Rick. Rick was a successful businessman, and he showed up at church one day because the church had put an ad on TV. Now, the pastor of this church had been adamantly opposed to this idea. Only fundamentalist mega churches do that, he said, and it costs too much. And besides, who picks a church based on a TV ad? Well, the church did it anyway. And they got dozens of visitors who had never been to church before. One of them was Rick. Rick brought his 8-year-old son Andy to church. And that day in children's school, in the Sunday school, they studied from the book of Esther, the story of Esther. And Andy, his son, was part of the Sunday school class. Well, the next day, on Monday, the pastor got a phone call from Rick. And he said, my son is so excited about this story he heard at church. He heard this story from the book of Esther. And can you tell me where I can get a copy of that book? Like, can I get it on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles? Where can I find this book? So Rick is he's a college graduate, successful businessman. He had never owned a Bible. He had no idea that Esther is a book in the Bible. Does that surprise us? That you can grow up in this country and not know that Esther is a book in the Bible? That's increasingly true, right? True for a lot of people. In 1910, only 3% of Americans were not raised with religious education, with a faith background in the church. Only 3% didn't experience that. In 2007, 78% of American adults called themselves Christian. By 2015, that number had dropped to 70%. It's a big shift in less than 10 years, almost 10% change. And if you look at millennials, the generation below me, more than 1/3 are unaffiliated with any faith. People who profess no faith affiliation now form 23% of our country's adult population. There are Ethiopian eunuchs all around us. This man is riding in his chariot. He's reading the book of Isaiah, and in that time, people always read out loud. So Philip can hear what he's reading. And the Spirit tells Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. It's kind of a funny scene, right? This Ethiopian official is riding in his chariot, reading out loud, and Philip is running alongside it. I'm just picturing this. Philip must have been in good shape. So he's running alongside the chariot. Now notice what Philip the evangelist does. You who say, I can't be an evangelist, I don't know what to say. Notice what Philip does. He asks a question. Do you know how to ask a question? Okay, I didn't see any hands, but I did see some heads nodding. All right. Well, then you're qualified to be an evangelist. Philip doesn't run up to the Ethiopian eunuch holding a sign that says John 3:16. He simply asks him, do you understand what you're reading? The eunuch responds, how can I unless someone explains it to me? And then he invites Philip to come up and sit with him. See, that's key. Philip doesn't force the issue. He simply asks a question and waits for the eunuch to invite him into the conversation. When the eunuch asks him for more, when the eunuch says, hey, can you help me figure out what this is about? Then Philip tells him about Jesus. This is not a story about Philip's amazing evangelistic strategy. This is a story about God's Spirit orchestrating an encounter and a conversation. The eunuch wants to know about God, but he's confused. He picks up a Bible and can't understand what he's reading. So God brings Philip into his life. The Spirit is the one driving this ship. Philip is just along for the ride. I have a friend named John who planted a church in Compton, California. And there's a community college in Compton. and John was on campus one day, so he decided to eat in the cafeteria of the school. And as he came into the cafeteria, he said a quick prayer. He just said, God, is there someone here you want me to talk to, someone you want me to connect with? He saw someone, and he just sensed, maybe him. So after he got his food, he went over and he sat down next to this guy, and he started up a conversation. And soon he realized this guy's into fire, like really, really into fire. And John was thinking, great, God, I'm trying to start a new church, and you lead me to a pyromaniac. Well, but here's the thing. God was at work in this pyromaniac's life. He was spiritually thirsty. He was searching for God, and God brought John into his life. Now, John, after this conversation, said, hey, we should hang out sometime. And they got together, and as John spent some time with him, listened, asked questions, listened to his questions he was asking, shared what he knew about Jesus, this former pyromaniac gave his life to Jesus, and he became one of the very first members in the new church that John was starting. What is to prevent me from being baptized? That's the question the eunuch asked. That's a good question. For people like Rick who have no idea what books are in the Bible, one obstacle to being baptized, to becoming a Christian, is simply that no one has ever told them about God. Let me repeat that. No one has ever told them about God. I wonder if we are preventing people from hearing about God. Are we keeping people from hearing about God's love? Are we constructing barriers between the gospel and people who desperately need to hear it? Is our fear of being like a stereotype a barrier? Is our lack of self-confidence, confidence in ourselves and what God has given us, a barrier? Is our desire to give people their religious space a barrier? Could it be that for many people like Rick, we are actually preventing them from knowing more about God? Are we keeping people from becoming disciples of Jesus? At times, my youngest son, Daniel, will say to me, Dad, I'm thirsty. And sometimes he'll grab one of those plastic bottles of water, but he can't get the lid off. He can't untwist it. And so he said, Dad, can you help me? Can you open this up for me? Now, if I were ever to hear that, would I simply do nothing? Would I sit there while he struggles to get water, knowing that he's thirsty? I'd never do that. But in a way, that is what the church does when we don't share the gospel with those who need it. We sit with the keys to the waters of baptism in our hands. Meanwhile, neighbors around us are desperately thirsty to know God and to know God's love. For the sake of love, let us not keep silent. But that's easier said than done, right? I mean, it seems like Philip had it easier than we do. It seems like all Philip did was show up, and God did the rest. If we were to be evangelists, would it be like that for us? How could we partner with God? How would the Spirit work with us? Where would the Spirit of God send us? Who would be on our pathway? Let's find out. I want to invite you to come on a spiritual adventure with me. What would it look like for us to be evangelists? This is what we'll be exploring together as a church for 6 weeks, starting February 8th. During Lent, which is the season of 40 days leading up to Easter, we are going to do an all-church event called Unbinding Your Heart. During Lent, we are asking every person in our church to commit to the following. Now, you may be a guest here today, you may be visiting, so this really applies to those who consider this your home church. If this is your home church, we are asking you to do the following. I have a slide I want to show you. We're asking you to read Unbinding Your Heart. So this is a copy of the book. It's not too fat, right? Not too fat, right? We're reading one chapter a week during Lent. Each chapter is about 15 pages. Raise your hand if you think you can read 15 pages in a week. All right, at least half of you. All right. So, we're reading Unbinding Your Heart. Copies of this book are available right now. We have them copies here. We've ordered more as well, but they are $10 each. We're asking you to get a copy of this book. We're asking each person to have a copy. Not one copy per family, not one copy per couple, but actually one copy per person, because the next thing we're asking you to do is to pray each day. And there's a daily prayer guide in this book. So each person needs their own to follow the 40 days of prayer. In the back of the book, for 6 weeks, there's a daily prayer guide with a scripture that will guide you with a simple prayer exercise. So we're asking you during Lent to pray each day. Now, I know for some of us, that's a stretch. I know for some of us, it's a stretch to read a book like this. And we're asking you to be in a small group that will study Unbinding Your Heart. We're not asking you to be in a small group for 3 months. We're not asking you to be in a small group for 10 years. We're asking you to be in a small group for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of getting to know some other people in our church. 6 weeks of praying individually and discussing what we're learning in this book. Now, I know some of us have never been in a small group. And I don't like it when pastors say, I guarantee you if you do this, you will experience this. But if you participate in Unbinding Your Heart, if you pray each day for 40 days, if you join a small group and discuss what you're learning, you will experience God in a new way. I'm not going to say exactly when. It may be one specific prayer day. It may be that conversation you have with the small group in the 4th week. There is a way you will experience God. There is a way you will meet God. There is a way you will connect with God and with other people in our church. I have truly believed that. I've experienced that in my own life. And I believe that God honors us when we take a step to reach out toward God. As we move toward God, God honors that and God meets us. If we knock on the door, God opens it. When we seek, we find. So we're asking everyone in our church to do that and to come and join us for Sunday worship during Lent. That is going to be starting 5 weeks from now. So you've got 5 weeks to get yourself ready. During Lent, we're going to focus on unbinding your heart. We want to cancel all other administrative meetings, all other activities as much as possible to do this together as a church family. You'll see inside your worship program the small groups that we're offering. Now, please note, we're offering a variety of groups. We have a group meeting every day of the week except Friday. We have 3 groups that meet during the day. We have 4 groups that meet at night. You'll see there's a group on Sunday at 10:45 a.m. If you're someone who thinks we should have church and then Sunday school, you've got it. Right after church, you can go to Sunday school for the Unbinding Your Heart discussion. That's Sunday at 10:45 a.m. Selma Oishi will be leading that. If you are a parent and you've got a 1-year-old or a 5-year-old who's crazy and runs around all the time, Cindy and I are hosting a group on Monday nights at 6 o'clock that's going to include a simple dinner and childcare. Okay? So couples with kids, you may want to consider that. Anyone is open, but that group, Monday nights at 6 o'clock, will specifically have dinner together and childcare provided. On Tuesdays at 10 a.m., Natalie Oda and I and others, we will be continuing the group that we started Tuesdays at 10, which we started for those who are retired, our senior adults. We'll be offering an Unbinding Your Heart small group on Tuesdays at 10 a.m., if that's a good time for you. Wednesday at 9 a.m., my wife is leading a group that is a women's group. That's Wednesday at 9 a.m. Wednesday at 7 p.m., if you know the Seekers group that has been meeting, that same time, that same event is a dinner. It's a potluck dinner. Welcome to all at the Tom's home. And we'll be giving you more information, but we just want you to know when each group is meeting. That's on Wednesdays at 7. Thursday at 7 p.m., Bruce Ayers and Mahe Vakauta. Hi, Mahe. Over here, raise your hand. Everyone knows he was just up here with the guitar. So Bruce and Mahe are leading a group Thursday at 7, and we have a group Saturday at 3 p.m. Hi, Liz. We're introducing all the other leaders, but that is when our dance ministry has been meeting, and we're turning that into a time for unbinding your heart. So we are giving you a lot of options, and we're asking you to pick one that best fits your schedule. What I'd like you to do today is to fill this out and to drop this off in the offering plate. So if you can decide which one of these works best for you, just to put a check next to it and to drop this off in the offering plate. And I'd encourage you to do it today. I know it's 5 weeks away, but this is something we're excited about, and we're really asking each person to be in a small group for 6 weeks as we seek to grow together. So I invite you to look at these. If you have questions, you can follow up. We'll have more information as far as where they're meeting and introduce our leaders later on. But this is available for you to say today, I'm in. I'm a go. I will be a part of this experience together that we're doing. I want to close by sharing about a family that had a very memorable Christmas. It was the last Christmas they spent at their grandparents' house. And the grandfather had Parkinson's disease and was shortly moving to an assisted living center. And the family's tradition was to gather together on Christmas Eve and for Granddad to read the Christmas story from the Gospel of Luke. So they gathered together to do this, but as Granddad began to read, he really was not able to because of his Parkinson's. He simply couldn't manage to speak the words aloud. And the family sat there and watched him struggle, and no one seemed to know what to do. It's like, should they say something? Would it hurt his pride if someone helped him? So everyone just kind of sat there for what seemed like quite a while. But Emily, the 6-year-old granddaughter, had just learned to read, and she knew exactly what to do. She quietly tiptoed over to his chair and plopped herself beside her grandfather. And then taking his finger in her hand, she helped him point to each word, saying them out loud with him as they read along together. Unto you is born this day a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. Do you know what you're reading? Philip asked the Ethiopian eunuch. The man nearly begged, how can I unless someone helps me? So Philip went and sat beside him. Who will God lead you to sit beside?